I want to go through starting with just the basics of this. Right, so we're talking about splitting markets up. We're saying that we don't want to advertise to everyone. That's not going to work. Well, some companies come close. McDonald's comes close. I think a lot of gambling comes close. Scratch-Its comes close, although they're limited just to the adult population. But saying, okay, can we split down who we're going to advertise for and therefore make our messages more succinct, more directed just to them. If there's a group of people we're looking at, if all we're looking at, for example, are pet owners, then we can make a message that's going to be attractive to pet owners. We'll put fluffy little dogs and cats on and stuff like that. So here's what a target market is. And these slides, as I said, these are on sector, so you can choose whether you just try and jot some notes down as you go or we have a look through them. But here's what we've got. A target market is a relatively homogeneous, which is just a fancy word for similar. A relatively similar group of consumers who are likely to react in the same way to a business's marketing miss. So that's their price, product, promotion, place, physical evidence, people. Okay. All those things are going to say, okay, if there's a bunch of these things put together, think about a prestige product. Think about BMW. Okay, the price is high, the promotion is based around prestige, the product is a high quality product. There's a group of consumers that is going to suit. Right? People probably with above average assets, they might live in particular areas, they might have similar kind of hobbies. So they can say, yeah, we can find a group of people who are relatively similar. Probably older people, a little bit older than average, those sort of things. Okay, if we move from that, we talk about two different ways that we can market things. And undifferentiated is the first, and that's the biggest. That means we're just selling something that pretty much goes to everyone. So an example that comes to mind there is, McDonald's, I think, is pretty close to undifferentiated. They've spent a lot of time advertising to older people, having images of older people in their ads, a wide range of products. So that by the time you look at it, there's not a lot of people they're not hoping walks through McDonald's door. And the success is that they have increased their sales significantly to people over the age of 55. So that's what they're looking at, differentiated marketing. I think Gold Lotto, those sort of things, is another example where the promise is, right, significant bits of wealth, and that appeals to pretty much everyone. And you can see those days where there's like a really big lotto draw coming up. You can see there's a whole lot of people lined up to buy that stuff. Callum?
What about people under the age of 18?
Yeah, then they can't. Doesn't mean that they don't want to, of course, too. But yes, they're not. They're not, certainly not targeting children so much. There are questions, though, of course, around some marketing that does target people that are not of appropriate age. And there's a lot of talk around alcoholic ice blocks, Alco Pops, and whether that wasn't designed specifically to target people who were 14, 15, 16 before what's an Alco Pop?
Yeah.
It was like an ice block. An ice block with alcohol in it.
Oh, is that an ad? What's the out or whatever?
Yes, yeah, that's not completely dissimilar. Yeah, so it was, and the question was, was that appropriate? And my understanding is they were intending to put an extra tax on that style of presentation of alcohol. I don't know exactly what's happened. But there you go, undifferentiated. That's the broad brush approach where you're trying to catch everyone. I don't think many of you will use that. You might a little bit, but not a huge amount. I think that most of you are going to say, here are some people, here are the characteristics of the people, and here's the message we can target for them. The opposite of undifferentiated is a niche market. So what a niche market means is a really small group of similar consumers. An example of a niche market might be if you're marketing to people with an unusual hobby. Right? Sometimes you see those medieval fairs. I don't know if that's a little bit unfair, but it does seem to be that there's a real niche amongst people who... Yeah, but they obviously enjoy it, and there's people. Another example might be if you are thinking about doing some sort of pet-based business. Right, let's say you were going to do a business that taught parrots to talk. Right, a parrot linguistics business. That's a pretty targeted group of people who own parrots and want them to be able to talk. So that's the idea of a niche business. You see it also around foods. Okay, people who provide foods for people with certain allergies or preferences. So, for example, there's 2 or 3 vegetarian restaurants I know in Brisbane, and it's not just vegetarians who go there, but obviously that market is going to be a market that they're intending to appeal to. So now we've talked about this already, like how we might measure the market dimensions. So we talk about demographics. Can anyone remember an example of what a demographic was? What was one demographic that we talked about doing? Right. Yeah, Tom.
Age.
Age is a great one. Okay, so age is one demographic that people might use for segmentation. What's another one? Gender. Gender is a really important one in a lot of products. Okay, so is it appeal to male or female, or does it not appeal to? Does it appeal to both? Right? It doesn't have to. Income might be another thing. Then you go on a geographic. So that's probably going to depend on whether you're selling a product that's based where people have to come and get it. If that's the case, you're going to be geographically bound to wherever the product is, right? If you're doing it in North Lakes, your target market are probably going to be people within 5 or 7 kilometres of North Lakes. And then behavioural. This is the most interesting. This is like saying, okay, if my business is teaching parrots to talk, then I'm looking at people who own parrots. It could be a sporting one. Right? If Callum's business is going to be taking overseas soccer tours, the behavioural characteristic there is going to be they want to play, or they're involved in soccer, they have an interest in soccer. That's their behaviour. Okay, some examples of demographics. You've got the important one: age, gender, ethnicity, education, family size, and remember that might also be family type, including singles or couples with no children. So they give you a few different examples there for your targeting. Behavioural interests we talked about. Social position might be one. Like if you've got a prestige product, it might appeal to people there. What's an example of a prestige product you think that appeals to people based on social position? What's an example of a prestige? Sorry? Yeah, brands, high quality car brands, very good. Clothing, Qantas Club, business class travel, that sort of thing. Nice. Okay, now we're going to slow down a little bit, because these 3 are 3 examples of what I would consider A-level resources that if you can incorporate them, can. Now, if that's a little bit hard to see on the screen, remember that you can go into sector and get these slides, right, and expand them to whatever you need. But it splits the process, and the reason I put this here is because you might follow this process and use this little model in your diagram, a little model in your report. It says there's 3 steps that you need to take. The first is to split the market up. That's called market segmentation. Now, if you think about an orange, it has a bunch of segments. Each of those segments is a little bit different. So that's the first thing, splitting into the different segments. Then there comes the market targeting. Right? Which segments am I interested in? Which segments do I actually want to use? And the third is then, how do I appeal to those segments, the market position? So for example, if I'm doing that training parrots to talk business, then how does my advertising appeal to people with parrots? Right? Do I have some ads, for example, down at the pet shop? Have I got some ads in magazines about birds? What have I done? How am I going to appeal them? Have I got a Facebook page that people can like? Have I got some funny bird talking videos up to show people what they might like if they can? Those sort of things. How am I doing those? So if you look through, they're the big things. Segmentation first, selecting, and then appealing. It's a pretty like intuitive process. If you go through the smaller one, segmentation is identifying how you're going to do it. How are you going to set your market up? So is it going to be on age? Is it going to be on things you like? Is it going to be on geographics? and then developing a profile. You might choose 3 or 4 market segments. And then you've got to say which one or ones am I going to choose, right? Which are going to be the most attractive for me. So measure how attractive they are, and probably the biggest measure of market attractiveness is going to be, the first one is going to be how many people are in the target market and how easily you can access them. They're going to be the two. And then you get up to market positioning. How do you design some advertising to fit into those people? It's quite a sophisticated model. I've got that textbook with me, so you can always come and have a look at that. The second one looks at what we were talking about, undifferentiated marketing. So this first one in the top left corner, the first diagram just says, well, I've got a mass market message. And you could have that in any business, right? So you might decide, if you're going to do your parrot linguistics business, training parrot to talk, you might decide that you're happy, you want everyone to know about that business. Right? Because people might then, even if they don't have parrots now, they might choose to buy a parrot. I think it's a very cool thing. They might have a school musical coming up where a talking parrot might be really awesome. All those sort of things, right? That you might decide, yeah, a mass market message is going to be worth doing. So you'll say, okay, I'm going to put something in the local newspaper, half-paid ads, do some advertising on the radio, and then a lot of people are going to know about it. But then you might come back and say, okay, maybe there are some then really specific groups I want to get to. It might be people who own parrots already and people who have owned parrots in the past. And I might try and find some way of getting in touch with those people, advertising directly to them. Brooke?
Does that mean for that differentiated market, would you kind of, if you were focusing on 2 parts to your
Yep.
business that were important to 2 different groups, would you do like 2 different ads?
Yes, yeah.
Target 2 different groups?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you definitely could target 2 different groups. So for example, let's go back to that vegetarian restaurant, right? And even in this case, we haven't got a product that's going to be different. You might say, well, my number 1 target market is vegetarians, right? And I'm going to try and get into that. But my number 2 might just be people who like to eat healthy,
Yeah.
or people who've got vegetarian friends and want to go out to a nice dinner with them. So you might make different messages for both of those groups, even if it's the one product. And certainly, if you've got slightly different products, you would make different messages. Okay. And the third one is saying, rightio, we're just going to have this one message that's going to appeal to a number of different people. If you can use that diagram, it is a complex diagram. It's A-level work, but if you can incorporate that diagram, it's going to show that you've really thought about different things. And look, the last one I've put in there, and I'll give to you guys separately, just goes through a whole lot of different variables you could segment a market on. Just give you some more ideas. And as you can see, that goes well beyond what our textbook does, right? You don't have to go beyond, but for some of you, you'll just look at 1 or 2 things and think, yeah, this is really awesome. And it shows to me as the person who's marking that you've gone beyond the work in the class. So are there any questions? Yeah, Vrushka. Yeah, that's not on the textbook. That's on a separate book that I've got that I'll start bringing down to lessons so you can have a look at it. And you can take and photocopy anything you need out of it. The page numbers are on the... I've got the page numbers for you. Any other questions? Okay. Let's have a look at where we go from here. What I want you to work on today